Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayat Nashta Praeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the Supremost Human, unto Mother Saraswati, the Goddess of Learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is destroyed almost to nil, and loving devotional service unto the Supreme Person, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Thank you for allowing me to speak on the Bhagavatam today, requesting the blessings of the senior Vaishnavas and all the Vaishnavas that I can say something helpful today. So we are in Canto 1, Chapter 9. The title of the chapter is The Passing Away of Bhishma Dev in the Presence of Lord Krishna. And today we are doing verse 15. Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja
Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam
Sri Gandivam Chapam
Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat. Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat. Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja
Gada Panir Rikodaraha
Gada Panir Rikodaraha
Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam
Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam
Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha
Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Suhrit Krishna Stato Vipat.
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja
Yatra Dharma Sutto Raja Gada Panir Rikodaraha Krishna Sri Gandivam Chapam Sri Krishna Stato Vipa. Yatra, where there is, Dharma Sutta, the son of Dharmaraj, Raja, the king, Panihi, with his mighty club in hand, Rikodaraha, Bhima, Krishna, Arjuna, Astri, carrier of the weapon, Gandiva, Chapam, bow, Suhrit, well-wisher, Krishna, Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, Tata, thereof, Vipat, reverse. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. So this is Bhishma Dev speaking to Yudhishthir. Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthir? The son of demigod controlling religion, Bhima, the great fighter with a club, the great bowman Arjuna with his mighty weapon Gandiva, and above all, the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. I'll say it one more time and we can repeat. Oh, how wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthir?
It is irreversible. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthira?
Thank you.
Are you reading from internet or?
I'm reading from the database.
It's like a different. It says, otherwise, how can there be reverse in the presence of King? It's okay.
This is from the database I copied.
This is also from the.
Okay. So what's the difference? Oh, okay. It just doesn't say it is irreversible. Okay. How wonderful is the influence of inevitable time. Otherwise, how can there be reverses in the presence of King Yudhishthir? Okay, to repeat. The son of demigod controlling religion. Bhima, the great fighter with a club. The great bowman Arjuna with his mighty weapon Gandiva. And above all, the Lord, the direct well-wisher of the Pandavas. Purport. As far as the material or spiritual resources were required, there was no scarcity in the case of the Pandavas. Materially, they were well equipped because two great warriors, namely Bhima and Arjuna, were there. Spiritually, the king himself was the symbol of religion. And above all of them, the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, was personally concerned with their affairs as their well-wisher. And yet, there were so many reverses on the side of the Pandavas. Despite the power of pious acts, the power of personalities, the power of expert management, and the power of weapons under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses, which can only be explained as due to the influence of Kala, inevitable time. Kala is identical with the Lord himself, and therefore the influence of Kala indicates the inexplicable wish of the Lord himself. There is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. Gyanatirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhivya Evacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So here Grandfather Bhishma Dev is consoling Maharaj Yudhishthir. Bhishma Deva is lying on a bed of arrows after the battle of Kurukshetra, and he's about to pass away. And he's going to impart very exalted instructions to Maharaj Yudhishthir. And as we recall a little bit earlier in the chapter, Krishna influenced Yudhishthir's heart so that he would become so-called bewildered by the massacre at Kurukshetra and all the people that died there. 640 million. So Yudhishthir was, Prabhupada says in the purports, although Yudhishthir was like a great, kshatriya and a rajarshi, so he did understand the duty of a rajarshi and a kshatriya. But due to Krishna's desire, Krishna influenced his heart so that he would seemingly act like a common man and be afflicted by material lamentation for all the people that were killed on the battlefield. So in this shloka, Bhishma Deva is telling Yudhishthira that, well, this is all within the plan of the Lord, that despite all the material and spiritual advantages that were on the side of the Pandavas, right, they had everything that, should have like avoided suffering, but despite all of those things, a lot of suffering came to the Pandavas. So Bhishma Dev is saying that this must only be due to the influence of Kala, which is representative of the Lord. And this Kala, or time, somehow delivers Krishna's plan, or Krishna's arrangement. Right? So Bhishma Deva is pacifying Yudhishthira in this way. This is all the influence of Kala, or Krishna himself. So there's no need to lament, because the Pandavas had all the advantages, all the material and spiritual advantages. In the purport it says, they had all this material and spiritual resources that were required. There was no scarcity in the case of the Pandavas. Materially, they were well equipped because two great warriors, namely Bhima and Arjuna, were there. Spiritually, the king himself, Yudhishthira, is a symbol of religion. And above all of them, Krishna, personality of Godhead, was on their side, and he was their well-wisher. And yet, despite all of this, there were so many reverses on the side of the Pandavas, right? So everything was there, correct, and yet still. So this must be understood as somehow Krishna's inexplicable wish and Krishna's inexplicable plan, this Kala. So a little bit more about this Kala, or time factor. I found a really nice definition in the 11th canto about the time factor. The material process of cause and effect takes place entirely within a sequence of time, right? That makes sense. Here in the material world, everything takes place within this time factor, the sequence of time. In other words, the time factor is the motivating impetus for material cause and effect. It's the motivating impetus for cause and effect. The time factor is a manifestation of Supersoul, the form of the Lord that pervades and supports the cosmic manifestation. Right? So in that sense, in the shloka, it said Kala is identical to the Lord. So it is a manifestation of the Lord, this time factor, and it's an impersonal feature of the Lord. On Friday, Dhruva Maharaj nicely delineated between spiritual energy and spiritual time factor and material time factor, and we can understand that they act differently. We know that in the spiritual world, time is, some sort of time does exist. Prangavinda Prabhu had said at one point, time must exist because there's like the Ashtakaliya Leela, for example, is happening every day. Right, so there is some sort of time factor there. However, we also know that there's no past or present or future, and there's always the eternal now, right? And the time factor in the spiritual world, it's not cause and effect, right? There's no karma to work out. So there isn't this like suffering associated with the time factor. Whereas in the material world, there is like, time factor is like cause and effect. So they act differently, this time factor, spiritually and materially. But ultimately, we have to understand that they both come from Krishna, right? Because material energies are transformations of spiritual energies, right? The material modes are transformations of Sat Chidananda. So they all come from Krishna himself, and they all have a purpose. So in this case here with Maharaj Yudhishthira, we say that it is Krishna's desire, and this was Krishna's Leela that brought everything about, so we do consider it as Leela. However, it was happening in the material world, so therefore, Krishna was using the time factor. There's the conditions of the material nature to make that Leela come about, right? So, even though it is Leela, the time factor was still being used here. One of the previous shlokas, I believe the one on Friday, last shloka, it says that under the time factor, under whose control everyone is carried in the material world, right? Everyone, even Lord Brahma. There's a very nice, Prabhupada quotes Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in the 7th canto about this time factor and the purpose of this time factor in the material world. This time factor is the impersonal representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who gives the living entities conditioned by material nature a chance to emerge from this nature by surrendering to Him, right? So this material factor is very nice, has a spiritual purpose. So it's an impersonal representation of Krishna, and it gives the living entities conditioned by material nature a chance to emerge from this nature by surrendering to Him. Right? That's a very nice definition of the time factor and how we can use it spiritually, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, then I wanted to talk about how in a few shlokas ago, Bhishma Deva is telling Yudhishthira to not regret the massacre because the Pandavas were under the protection of 3 elements. Does anyone remember what the 3 elements were, which the Pandavas were under protection of?
On the text 12,
Yes.
it said, Vipra, Achyuta Ijja. So you have to take shelter of the sadhus or brahmanas.
Yes, thank you.
And the Achyuta is Krishna. Then there is no suffering. Pandava had that.
Yes. Exactly correct. From 1.9.12. Bhishmadev wanted to point out that the Pandavas were always protected by the Brahmanas or Vaishnavas, the Lord Himself, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these 3 important items, there was no cause for disappointment. Thus, Bhishmadev encouraged Yudhishthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstances of life. So it fits in very nicely here because the Pandavas were following all these 3 items and they were under the protection of those 3 items, and yet still they suffered so many reverses. So again, in the shloka, Bhishmadeva is saying, we can only understand this as the influence of Kala, or inevitable time. And that is the wish, and somehow it is the wish of the Lord to bring about some kind of Leela. So if we are endeavoring under these 3 factors, and we're getting the protection of these 3 factors, and yet still, things may happen, right? Some difficulties or reverses. So how do we understand that? So did anybody want to offer a suggestion? So we're endeavoring under the 3 factors which Bhishmadev mentions here, which is the wish of the Lord, the Brahmanas or Vaishnavas, the pure Vaishnava, and religious principles. We're endeavoring, but still reverses come. So how do we understand that? Mother Sukara?
Well, one thing that we learn from the purport of Tatyani Kamkam, I think we learn from the verse not Tatyani Kamkam Shikshamana, that sometimes Krishna, for his devotees especially, makes an arrangement
Yes.
just to bring them
closer.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly.
Sometimes it's a slowing down of karma, but it does say in that verse that particularly Krishna makes a special arrangement.
Thank you. That was exactly my answer that I had. So it's the fan has stopped, right? But it's still spinning. It stopped, but the blades are still going. So there's still some vestiges of previous actions that need to be worked out. And also Krishna himself can personally make the arrangement in order to, it says, to completely expiate the enjoying propensity of the jiva in the material world. So that is how we can understand it for ourselves. If we are endeavoring under those three guidelines, but still there's difficulties and reverses, that is how we can understand it. And so, what do? Tat tenukampanam susamikshamano. My dear Lord, one who earnestly awaits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you respectful obeisances within his heart, words, and body, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. And then another way that we can understand it is it's just Krishna's Leela, and he's trying to bring about some plan, some desire of his, and it's just, he's just going to make it happen despite the reverses, or using those reverses to make it come about. Right? Dhruva Maharaj made a very nice quote about that. He says, godly energies that force us into certain situations. I thought that was nice. Even though we are endeavoring correctly. Godly energies that force us into certain situations. A few classes ago, I talked about how it may be, well, I wanted to mention how the time factor is connected with surrender and trying to fulfill Krishna's desire, right? So there's a time factor involved in that. And if we are trying to be an instrument in Krishna's plan, right? So it's not always easy to do that, and somehow the time factor plays a role in that. So also, Krishna was telling Arjuna, right? He took the whole Bhagavad Gita, the whole time factor of the Bhagavad Gita being spoken for Arjuna to surrender and follow Krishna's plan. I'll just read a few shlokas from the 11th chapter in the Gita, where Krishna is instructing Arjuna. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, "Time I am, the great destroyer of the worlds, and I have come here to destroy all people. With the exception of you, the Pandavas, all the soldiers here on both sides will be slain." So it's already done. It's Krishna's plan. "Therefore, get up, prepare to fight and win glory. Conquer your enemies and enjoy a flourishing kingdom. They are already put to death by my arrangement, and you, O Sabyasachi, can be but an instrument in the fight. Drona, Bhishma, Jayadratha, Karna, and the other great warriors have already been destroyed by me. Therefore, kill them and do not be disturbed. Simply fight, and you will vanquish your enemies in battle." Okay, did anybody want to add something to that part of it? Let's have one last section to talk about, but before we go on, if somebody wants to say something about that or add something. Yes?
So here we see that Krishna he's performing his Leela, and certainly the Pandavas are not conditioned souls, and due to Leela, he is putting them into difficult situation. As conditioned souls, and trying to practice bhakti, we understand, Srila Prabhupada says that, Krishna is kind to us, and if our hand is meant to be cut off, he will just give a little token punishment. Mm-hmm. My question is that, does Krishna sometime to his devotees who are sadhakas, does he give more than their actual past karmic activities, more trouble, just like it did for the Pandavas, but does he do that for the conditioned souls, more in order to bring them closer, or to set an example? Could you say something on that?
Thank you for that question. I think certainly in the case of Krishna's intimate associates, like we see in the Leela here, Yudhishthira and the Pandavas, who were not ordinary jiva souls. They were intimate associates of Krishna coming here to perform some Leela. Yes, I think like you said, in their case, I think that they do probably get more than their share of suffering, right? I think also that Krishna gives them knowledge within the heart to understand that they are in a special situation. In terms of the Baddha Jiva, regular conditioned souls, does Krishna give them more than their share of suffering? We hear that Krishna minimizes karma, right? Well, this is sort of my speculation, and maybe somebody can say more about that also. I think that Krishna can do as he pleases, and I think that, yes, if he can make the arrangement, like whatever is required, right? He acts according to the surrender, to the portion, to degree of surrender of the jiva. So whatever is required, if somebody is very surrendered and very sincere, it may be something like very difficult or painful that is a special arrangement by Krishna to like we say in the verse, Tatenukampanam samikshamano, he makes a special arrangement to bring that soul closer to him, and that may look like very painful, right? If that person has some material attachment, it may be very painful, and I would tend to think because Krishna is personal, because he deals with each of us personally, and then he knows exactly what each one of us needs to bring him closer. And they could be outside of the bounds of like what is due to him karmically. So my answer would be yes, that Krishna is personal, and if he sees a very surrendered and sincere soul, I think he could give him more than his share of like karmic reactions in order to produce a certain result, right? To produce a certain purity, a certain eliminating of anarthas. So I think I would have to say yes, that because Krishna is personal, and if there's a high degree of surrender by a soul, a conditioned soul, that yes, he could make that arrangement. But ultimately the suffering, and this is even in the chapter, the suffering is temporary, right? So after that suffering is over, the result will be very good for that sincere, surrendered soul, right? He'll get that purification, and he will be closer. He will come closer to Krishna because of that purification. So I would have to say yes, based on the sincerity and the level of surrender of the conditioned soul, that yes, Krishna can make any special arrangement. Would you agree with that?
Yasyaham anugrinami, that famous verse where Krishna takes everything away from the devotee, and he says that then when the devotee is bereft of everything, everybody leaves him, gives up on him because he doesn't have any money, then he has no other choice but to surrender to Krishna. So the end is good.
Right.
You're right. It's exactly
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
But I do have a comment if I could make
Please
this. This
do,
is from
yes.
the 1132 Kalosmi, Time I Am. Prabhupada says in the purport, he quotes the Katha Upanishad, and I just love the way this says. Eventually, all Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and everyone else are devoured like a meal by the Supreme. This form of the Supreme is the all-devouring giant, and here Krishna presents himself in that form of all-devouring time. And except for a few Pandavas, everyone who was present on that battlefield would be devoured by him.
I like that too.
It's a meal. We're all a
Divine
meal. For
imagery, yeah.
He ate them. So nobody's getting. I listened to a lecture the other day, and Prabhupada said, Krishna said, "Don't make any mistake here. No one is going home."
Nice, thank you. Right. In the 10th chapter of the Gita, Krishna's Vibhutis, he says, "Among subduers, I am time." Right? Yes.
So this Leela here, it's very, very difficult to comprehend. I mean, you know, we have different reasons and explanations of what's happening. But even when the Pandavas were in this 13 years of exile, they were complaining too. It's not like they accept it easily. Draupadi was fighting like anything. Bhima was rebelling, you know. Let us go and kill the Kauravas now, you know, I mean. And so Yudhishthira was always constantly asking, well, why this? The sages says, look at Ramachandra, he was the Lord himself, and he had to go in the forest for so many, 13 years, 12 years. Then they explain the story of Nala and Damayanti. You know, you think you're suffering, but look, you know. So it's not that they accept, but then if you look at it too, when during the gambling, first they had gambled, Draupadi was insulted, and then the Dhritarashtra gave them back everything, sent them home. Duryodhana was still envious, they came back, gambled again. So it's still that Yudhishthira knew that he would lose. There, you know, he cannot win from Shakti. But still he went and gambled, voluntarily accepting 13 years of exile. So he was trying to explain to his brother, it's not like, you know, that the thing. I knew this was going to happen and I accepted really. So part of this we have to accept.
Yes, thank you.
Within the 13 years there was a lot of benefits. Arjuna went 5 years to the heavenly planets and got all the arms and everything he needed for that war that Krishna wanted badly. So, you know, Krishna's plan was also intertwined with it, their own doing, so many, you know, many factors, in other words, many factors came about for this to happen.
Yes.
You know? And
thank you. It's complicated, it's not straightforward. And, you know, the whole Gita had to be spoken for Arjuna to accept Krishna's plan, right? And Arjuna is also an intimate associate of the Lord. But we did also learn in this, we do also know that Krishna influences the heart of these players in these leelas, right? He influences the heart to make them act a certain way or make them believe something or take on some conception. So Krishna is like, in these leelas, Krishna is pulling all the strings, so to speak. Okay. Before we get to another question, I'll just, which is one other quick portion of the class. So how do we utilize the time factor? Right? We know that in the material world, the time factor brings about our devastation. Right? Prahlad Maharaj talks about the 6 transformations of the material body: birth, existence, growth, transformation, dwindling, and then death. Right? But there's no such changes for the spirit soul. We've all seen the changes of the body, and we understand what that means. You know, but are we living with that conception daily? So Prabhupada, in a class in Bombay in 1974, he says that those who do not know the Supreme Personality of Godhead as time, that they live in fear, the fear of material existence, right? So we understand that he is time, and we understand like the changing bodies, and the devotee is Dhira with the changing bodies. And he's not bewildered, and he's not bewildered to know that the soul goes into another body at death, right? Bhagavad Gita 2:13. So knowing all this, how do we optimize or utilize the time factor here in the material world, right? Prabhupada says, for those who have forgotten the Supreme Lord and have identified themselves with this material world, for them, the fearfulness is there. But those who are not in the material existence, but in the spiritual existence or spiritual life or spiritual activities, for them there is no bhayam or fear. Prahlad Maharaj says, while in material existence, bhavam ashritaha, a person fully competent to distinguish wrong from right must endeavor to achieve the highest goal of life. Right? So while in material existence, being under the control of the time factor, understanding how it works and understanding the changing bodies and understanding how it brings about cause and effect, we utilize this time factor to progress in spiritual life. Would anybody like to give an example of how we use this time factor to progress in spiritual life? It's sort of like a very basic idea, but I was thinking, this is kind of funny. Right, so in the past just few hours, each of us chanted like a certain amount of rounds, right? So that's us existing within the time factor and utilizing the time factor to perform spiritual activities. It's sort of like very simplistic, but I sometimes like think like that. So does anybody else want to give an example of how we utilize and optimize the time factor here in the material world so that we can live, beyond bhayam or fear of the time factor, which is always bringing about our devastation? Does anybody else want to share? Yes.
I wonder what will happen if we keep on speaking till 12 o'clock. How many will be in the temple?
Yes, would be an interesting experiment of the time factor. Right, so we're limited. On one hand, we are limited by the time factor, right? Like, now I have to go here, right? Now I have to do this. It seems like there's like pockets of time for us to engage in devotional activities, and I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur was very expert in how he optimized the time. I sort of try to follow his example. Like, okay, I have 30 minutes to do this. I have 15 minutes to do this. Did you want to say something else?
No, that's good.
Yes, sure, Prabhupada.
We have 24 hours a day, and we have to organize it in such a way, foremost duty, you have to serve the Lord, you have to do your material duty, so to speak,
Yes.
so many different things.
We have to
So you
prioritize and organize.
So it's better everything is organized, and if it's organized, then you can go through the 24 hours nicely. But if you're disorganized, then everything goes haphazardly, and for a devotee, he has to be organized.
That's it's a nice point.
And a quick point is, it's stated, time wears away everything unnoticed. Like an unbaked pot placed in water disappears imperceptibly.
Yes.
See? So every second, time is taken away from us.
Right.
Every second that we would never get again. You see? So
yes, we are constantly use the word battling against the time factor, but somehow we have to utilize it properly. So yeah, it is this constant like onslaught of time, right, that we're sort of quote unquote battling against. Nandini Kishore?
Can I go back to the previous question?
Yes, please do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for nice, wonderful realizations. So Madhumati asked if some devotees get more than their karmic activity. I think, and again you can comment on that or correct me, is Dvaita Advaita philosophy. Yes and no. I think some, like Prahlad Maharaj's canto we read, he suffered so much to common person. But at the same time, Prabhupada says that he was also a liberated person. He was in Vaikuntha at the same time he was on this planet Earth. So just to show a common man, it may feel like it was his past karma, he was a boy, he eluded a girl, and
Yes.
that can be for a
Right.
common man. But for a spiritually realized person, he's Nitya Siddha.
All right, thank you. That's
And
a nice point.
I even know people in this room or in our devotee community, I think they must have prayed to give me some suffering of our acharyas, our gurus, so that more than their share, so that their gurus may suffer less. And third point is, when we suffer, sometimes it just doesn't feel like anything. It feels we can pray that it doesn't feel us or affect us, because we are really not this body.
Thank you.
We can, and also when we suffer, actually, so many devotees shower so many blessings on you. It becomes part of life. Like Radhanath Swami, he said, so many tribulations in New Vrindavan. How did you survive? Somebody asked him. How, waking up at 2 a.m., doing with the axe, taking out the water from the eyes, walking all the way upstairs, not sleeping till midnight, doing a duty of the guard, and still reading all the books. And he said, if you knew what lies ahead on our spiritual path, you'll roll in the ground with ecstasy. So if our aim is Krishna's lotus feet, then everything is like a flower. And also in Bhishma Dev's, right now we are on that chapter, it says somewhere that those arrows felt like kisses on Bhishma Dev's body.
Thank you.
So it's just what you feel. It may,
Thank you.
maybe it's totally different.
Thank you. Those are really nice points. Thank you, Nandini.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else?
Can read the bottom.
Can she explain how the time factor is a transformation of Satchidananda? Well, I can't explain how, but it is written by our acharyas that it is a transformation. The material modes are transformations of Satchidananda. So I can't explain, how. But Krishna's potencies are, he has potencies, right? So they're either acting in a spiritual level or in a spiritual world, or they're acting in the material world. But ultimately, all the potencies, they come from spiritual potencies in the material world. Did you have some shloka for that, Prabhu? Or some input about...
There's more. You can just read whichever.
Oh, okay. I think we're sort of out of time. Does that mean that Krishna has already decided who will die and who will survive? Yes. Right. Krishna says that himself in the Bhagavad Gita. He already decided everything beforehand, and Arjuna would just have to be an instrument.
11:33.
Yes, in the 11th chapter of Gita, Drona, Bhishma, Jayadratha, Karna, and the other great warriors have already been destroyed by me. Therefore, kill them and do not be disturbed. Simply fight and you will vanquish your enemies in battle. So they're already put to death. Right? O Savyasatchi, they are already put to death. Samapriya Devi Dasi, to the extent we use our time in Krishna's service, we will not be affected by fear. Right. That's what Krishna is saying as well. Thank you. Beautiful, relevant class. Well, I'm glad it was relevant. I'll just finish with Mother Samapriya's comment. There is so much to do as we engage in doing everything for Krishna that we naturally become fearless because we enter into eternity. Thank you. Okay, Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Oh, Jai.
I was going to